I never imagined the people I loved most would be the ones to destroy me. One moment, I was standing at the edge of the yacht, breathing in the salty air, watching the sun glisten across the waves. The next, I felt a sudden force against my back, my daughter-in-law's hands, a shove. The world tilted, and the sound of my own scream was swallowed by the ocean. The shock of the cold water was like knives piercing every inch of my body. I plunged beneath the surface, my dress wrapping around me like chains, pulling me down. For a brief second, I thought it was an accident, that they would throw me a rope, reach for me, shout my name in panic. But when I broke the surface, gasping for air, I saw their faces leaning over the rail. My son, my only son. He was smiling. Not the warm, boyish smile I once knew, but something colder. And in that instant, I understood. This wasn't a mistake. It was their plan all along. The waves slapped against me, salt stinging my eyes, my throat burning as I swallowed water. Panic clawed at me, but beneath it was something worse, betrayal so deep it crushed me more than the ocean ever could. I had carried that boy in my arms, kissed his scraped knees, sacrificed everything after his father died. And now, he stood above me, letting me drown, as if I meant nothing more than a burden to be erased. Every instinct screamed at me to fight. My limbs flailed against the heaviness of my soaked clothes, each kick a battle against the pull of the deep. The yacht's engine roared, and I realized with horror they weren't waiting. They were leaving. My son and his wife were actually sailing away, leaving me to die in open water. The sea was endless, and for a moment, so was my despair. My body trembled with cold, but my heart burned with something sharper than fear, anger, disbelief, a pain no drowning could extinguish. It wasn't just death they wanted, it was erasure. They wanted my name, my legacy, my fortune, while I disappeared into the Atlantic as though I'd never existed. And yet, in those terrifying minutes, as I fought for breath and life, another thought crept into my mind, a question that pierced through the terror. How did it come to this? How did love unravel into betrayal so complete, so merciless? I'll take you back. Back before the push, before the water closed over my head. Back to when I still believed family meant something. That blood could never turn cold. Let me tell you how this nightmare began. After the water swallowed me, after the shock and the betrayal, my mind couldn't help but rewind. Back to the moment this all began. Back to the phone call that should have been a red flag. But instead, I let my heart turn into hope. It was a Tuesday morning, quiet, uneventful, the kind of day where the sunlight falls gently through the blinds and you think nothing in the world could go wrong. That's when my phone rang, and I saw my son's name glowing on the screen. He hadn't called directly in weeks. Usually it was through his assistant or a rushed text. But this time, it was him. My David. His voice was warm, almost tender, and for a brief, fleeting moment, I felt like I had my son back. He said he wanted me to join him and Vanessa for a special outing on their yacht to celebrate my recovery from surgery. He told me it would just be the three of us. A family moment, the way things used to be. I wanted so badly to believe it. Since Robert's death, the house had felt colder, emptier. And though I still had my son, I often felt like a guest in his life rather than a mother. Vanessa made sure of that. She always seemed to stand between us. Sharp smiles and polished words, as though she were curating how much of me David was allowed to keep. But when he said he wanted to celebrate me, to toast my recovery, my chest swelled with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe this was the beginning of a new chapter. Maybe grief had simply built walls between us that could now come down. I dressed with care that morning. It may sound foolish, but I wanted to look like the woman my husband used to see, the woman whose eyes lit up in his favorite navy dress. As I looked in the mirror, I whispered to myself that this was a chance, one I couldn't waste. When I arrived at the marina, David greeted me with a smile that almost felt genuine. He embraced me, though his arms carried a stiffness I couldn't quite ignore. And then I saw Vanessa, perfectly composed, perfectly dressed, her smile glittering but cold, like glass that could cut if you touched it. She looked me over, not with warmth, but with calculation, as though I were a guest she hadn't invited, but was forced to tolerate. Still, I told myself not to dwell on it. I followed them aboard, running my hand along the sleek rail of the yacht. It was magnificent, gleaming white, an unmistakable show of wealth. My heart twisted a little because I knew, deep down, that some of that money had once been mine, entrusted to David in good faith. But I tucked that thought away. Today was supposed to be about family, not finances. The first hour passed quietly enough. Vanessa served drinks, David made small talk, and for a moment I let myself believe we were healing. But beneath the laughter, beneath the gentle clinking of glasses, I felt an undercurrent, something unsaid, a chill that had nothing to do with the breeze off the water. I wanted so badly for that day to be about love, about reconnection. But in my heart, there was a quiet unease, an instinct I ignored. And that instinct would soon prove right. At first, everything on the yacht felt like the celebration David had promised. The sea was calm, the Massachusetts coastline shrinking behind us, and the sun cast a golden shimmer across the water. I told myself that maybe this really was a new beginning. Maybe grief had only clouded my vision, and what I was seeing now was the family I had prayed for. Vanessa poured champagne with practiced elegance, her laugh light but hollow. She complimented the yacht, the house, their future plans, each word polished like a showroom floor. I smiled, nodded, tried to keep up, but in the back of my mind there was a prickle, a faint warning I tried to ignore. Then David shifted the conversation. At first, it was harmless enough questions about how I was feeling, how recovery from surgery had been. I was touched, thinking he truly cared. But soon, his words grew sharper. He asked about my will, about whether I had made things simple for everyone. His tone carried an undercurrent I couldn't quite place. Vanessa lingered nearby, pretending to snap selfies. But I noticed the way her phone tilted toward me, capturing me in the background while my champagne glass stayed full. She wasn't documenting family memories. She was building a case. The realization crept over me slowly at first. Little details that seemed off. Their insistence on handling my paperwork after surgery. The strange calls from my financial advisor that had suddenly stopped. And now, on this yacht, far from shore, my son was speaking about probate and inheritance with a little too much enthusiasm. I set my glass down carefully, trying to mask the trembling of my hands. I told David I was ready to return to shore. But that was when everything changed. His voice hardened, and for the first time, I saw the mask slip. He told me I wasn't well, that I'd been forgetting things. that maybe I wasn't capable of making decisions anymore. My heart froze. I was sharper than both of them combined. Yet here he was, painting me as a woman slipping into dementia. Vanessa stepped closer, her voice smooth, confirming his story, claiming they had documentation, that doctors agreed. They spoke as though I wasn't even there, as though I was already an empty shell they could dismiss. That was the moment I knew. The embrace at the dock, the warmth in his voice, the toast to my recovery, it had all been a performance, leading to this. I looked at my son, the boy I had raised, the boy I had sacrificed everything for, and I didn't recognize him anymore. His eyes were cold, calculating, and when I refused to sign the documents, he laid in front of me. Vanessa finally let her smile break free. It was a smile that held no love, only victory. I told them they were insane if they thought they'd get away with it. But Vanessa leaned in close, whispering words that turned my blood to ice. Tragic accidents happen all the time. Before I could react, I felt her hands against my back. Not a violent shove, but a subtle push timed perfectly as I leaned toward the railing. My body lurched forward, unsteady from the healing of my hip, and in a heartbeat, the world tilted again. The sea rose up to claim me. The cold was immediate, shocking every nerve in my body. My lungs seized as salt water rushed in, my arms flailing against the drag of my heavy clothes. Above me, the last thing I saw before the ocean closed over my head was the image of my son standing still, watching. No panic, no attempt to save me. Just silence. And then there was nothing but the deep, endless blue. The ocean was swallowing me whole. My limbs thrashed against the pull of the waves, each breath a desperate gasp between gulps of salt water. I had almost surrendered to the cold when, through blurred eyes, I caught sight of something, an outline against the horizon. A small fishing boat, weathered but steady, cutting across the waves like salvation itself. I wanted to scream, but my voice was lost to the sea. Still, the figure at the bow must have seen me, because moments later, rough, calloused hands were reaching down, gripping my arms, dragging me from the water. I collapsed onto the deck, shivering so violently that my teeth rattled. A thick blanket, smelling of salt and oil, wrapped around me as I struggled to breathe. It was an older man, sunburnt skin and sea-streaked hair, and his grandson, barely a teenager, but strong enough to help haul me aboard. Their eyes were wide with shock, but there was no hesitation in their kindness. They didn't ask who I was, not at first. They just worked to keep me alive. When I finally caught my breath, words tumbled out in fragments. My son, the yacht, left me to drown. Saying it aloud nearly broke me, but the fisherman's steady gaze anchored me. He didn't look at me like I was crazy. He looked at me like he believed me. When he reached for the radio to call the Coast Guard, instinct jolted through me. I grabbed his arm with trembling hands and shook my head. No, not yet. If David and Vanessa knew I was alive, they would find another way to finish what they started. I needed them to think they had succeeded. The fisherman studied me for a long moment, his eyes sharp with the wisdom of someone who had seen more than most men ever will. Then he gave a slow nod, and without a word, silenced the radio. His grandson looked uncertain, but he followed his grandfather's lead. That quiet agreement, that choice to protect a stranger's secret, was the first spark of hope I'd felt since I hit the water. As the boat turned back toward shore, I sat wrapped in the heavy blanket, staring at the horizon where the yacht had disappeared. My body ached, my skin burned from salt and cold, but inside me something shifted. Only hours before, I had been a victim discarded, written off as a liability, but now, presumed dead. I realized I had something my son and his wife could never imagine: freedom. Being alive had made me vulnerable, but being dead, that gave me power. And I knew then, shivering on that little fishing boat, that I would not waste it. In the days that followed, I stayed hidden. The fisherman and his grandson had quietly introduced me to a friend of theirs, a woman who ran a small inn on the edge of town. She asked no questions, simply gave me a warm bed, a set of borrowed clothes, and the kind of silent compassion only strangers seem willing to offer. I should have been resting, recovering from the trauma, but my mind was restless. My body had been thrown into the ocean, but my spirit was no longer willing to drift. I needed to know how deep my son's betrayal went. The first thing I did was search the news. My obituary had already been written. According to the articles, I had been lost at sea, a tragic accident during a family outing. I read the quotes attributed to David, his words painting me as confused, fragile, a mother whose memory was failing. They spoke of my decline, of their endless concern for my safety. Even Vanessa played her part, describing me as though I were a burden she had valiantly endured. I stared at the screen, fists clenched so tight my nails cut into my palms. This wasn't just betrayal, it was character assassination. They weren't content with my fortune. They wanted to erase me as a person, replace me with a pitiful caricature of dementia and decline. But the more I read, the clearer the pattern became. These weren't just the lies of a desperate son. They were orchestrated, precise, too well prepared. I dug deeper. I still had access to certain accounts, small funds my husband and I had kept aside for emergencies. I used that money to hire a discreet investigator recommended by the innkeeper. He was a man who knew how to move in the shadows, and within days, he brought back documents that made my blood run cold. My son and his wife hadn't acted alone. There were forged medical reports, all signed off by reputable doctors, stating I was showing early signs of dementia. There were legal drafts with altered signatures, wills rewritten in handwriting eerily close to mine. And then, there were records of meetings between David, Vanessa, and a lawyer whose name I vaguely recognized from a charity gala months earlier. This woman specialized in what she called family transition planning, a euphemism that, when stripped of its polish, meant something far uglier. She worked with families to quietly move wealth from aging parents into the hands of younger heirs by any means necessary. The investigators' files revealed case after case. Wealthy seniors who had supposedly suffered sudden accidents or mental decline. Fortunes transferred quickly, estates settled with eerie efficiency. Some of those seniors I even recognized from my own social circle. Their deaths had raised eyebrows, but not enough to spark investigations. I felt sick. This wasn't just about me. This was a machine, a network preying on the vulnerable, fueled by greed and legitimized by professionals who should have been protectors, doctors, lawyers, accountants, all playing their part in robbing people of their dignity, their wealth, their lives. And at the center of it all were my own flesh and blood. Outrage surged through me, sharper than grief. My son's betrayal was no longer an isolated act of cruelty. It was part of something larger, something calculated. He and Vanessa weren't just trying to steal from me, they had allowed themselves to become tools in a system that murdered trust, murdered safety, and sometimes murdered people outright. I sat at the small desk in my borrowed room. The investigator's papers spread before me, the evidence undeniable. For the first time since being pushed into the water, I felt clarity settle over me. They thought I was gone, powerless, erased. But they were wrong. If death had given me freedom, then invisibility had given me a weapon, and I knew exactly how I would use it. It was time to return from the dead. They believed I was gone. That was their first mistake. I didn't come back all at once. I knew better than to burst through the door screaming for justice. No, I wanted them unsettled, nervous, doubting the lies they had worked so hard to build. So I began with whispers of my existence. A note slipped into David's office, written in my own hand, with nothing but the words, "I see you." A single flower left on Vanessa's car. The same kind Robert used to bring me every anniversary. Small things only I could have known. The effect was immediate. From a distance, I watched as their composure cracked. Vanessa's shoulders tightened whenever she stepped outside. David started glancing over his shoulder in public. They had convinced the world I was dead, yet they could not convince themselves. And that was exactly what I wanted. Each day, their paranoia grew. I could almost taste their fear, and it gave me strength. For years, they had taken my trust, my generosity, my love, and twisted it into something ugly. Now, I was twisting theirs. But whispers were only the beginning. Eventually, I wanted more than to haunt them. I wanted them to look me in the eye and see the woman they had tried to erase. So I returned to my old house, the one I had foolishly signed over, thinking it would keep me close to my son. I let myself in with the key David never thought to take back, and I settled into the living room. My living room. I chose Robert's old armchair, the one that still carried the faintest scent of his cologne, and waited. When the front door finally opened, their laughter carried through first. But laughter died quickly. Vanessa's scream split the silence, raw and piercing, as her eyes fell on me. David froze in place, keys still dangling in his hand, his face drained of color. I didn't shout. I didn't threaten. I only looked at them calmly, almost tenderly, and said the words I knew would echo in their nightmares. Did you miss me? The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt in control again. And that night, I knew the reckoning had only just begun. The moment I revealed myself was only the beginning. Fear alone wasn't enough. I needed justice, not just for me, but for every soul that network had stolen from. With the evidence I had gathered, the forged documents, the investigators' findings, and even recordings from that night in my home, the authorities had more than enough to act. It didn't take long before federal agents moved in, pulling the thread that unraveled everything. The polished lawyer who had orchestrated so many family transitions was exposed. Doctors and accountants who had lent their signatures for profit were dragged into the light. And at the center of it all, David and Vanessa faced the reality they could no longer escape. Watching my son led away in handcuffs was a pain I can't put into simple words. He was still my child, the boy I had once held against my chest. But he had chosen greed over love, power over family. I grieved for the man he could have been, even as I knew he had to face the consequences. Vanessa never looked back. For her, it was always about the money. But amid all that loss, something precious remained. The baby, the innocent child they had tried to use as a pawn, was placed safely into loving care. I made sure his future would not be defined by the cruelty of the people who brought him into this mess. That child, above all, deserved truth, protection, and love. And as the dust settled, I found myself thinking less about what I had lost and more about what I had learned. Blood is not the only thing that makes a family. Kindness does. Integrity does. The fisherman who pulled me from the sea, his grandson who wrapped me in blankets, the innkeeper who offered me shelter, they showed me more love in my darkest hour than my own son did. True family is not defined by last names or inheritance. It is defined by the people who choose to stand beside you when you are weakest. I survived betrayal. I survived erasure. And I came back not just to reclaim my life, but to remind myself, and maybe even you, that we are stronger than the people who try to silence us. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you in any way, please share it, leave your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Your voice matters, too.